Out of all aspects of filmmaking, something that can make or break a movie is the costume design. The more and more you read into the meaning behind the clothes, the clearer their purpose in the story becomes. Take, for example, Killers of the Flower Moon, which has been my most anticipated movie of 2023. After reading the article, Killers of the Flower Moon and Scorsese's Bride Like No Other, it got me so inspired that I decided to do the unthinkable. I marathoned all 26 of director Martin Scorsese's films to see how the filmmaker grew over time and to see how the film would fit into his catalog. Upon hearing his name, your immediate thought is probably a gangster movie.
Hey, Mom, what do you think?
You look like a gangster.
However, only so much of one artist's career can fit into a box. This man's career can take any shape or form, and a large part of it is the costumes that separate people culturally and lyrically, immersing the viewer in the stories across time periods and cultures. I've separated all of his films into 3 unique categories based on their costumes and how they aid the story they go along with. Tragically, I can't talk about every single movie he's done, so I picked a few of the best examples of each category for the points I'd like to make, and I'll explain at the end how Killers of the Flower Moon connects all 3 as a culmination of over 50 years of work. It's no joke that gangster movies are Scorsese's most reliable mold, with suits and ties appearing in nearly every one of them. They can take plenty of different meanings based on which characters are wearing them. Goodfellas dresses up its main characters in suits and ties to display evil characters within the film, showing blazers as dress-up parties for events at all times, and making the illusion of adulthood and maturity. But behind the looks is more like a high school gang. The Departed uses the suits as disguises as well, with the typical white-collar police character turning out to be the villain, while the undercover hero posing as a criminal is only seen in everyday clothes, the suits serving as a disguise for the real villains of the story. I would argue that the most important white-collar film that Scorsese's made is none other than 2019's The Irishman. This movie not only uses the typical gangster suit and tie costume to show violence, but it also shows 2 faces of protagonist Frank Sheeran, navigating his turn to the criminal underworld, wearing his everyday clothes while being a family man, only to get fitted up for a new suit when he's with his mob buddies, making hits and robberies all across Philadelphia. The second camp of costumes I've called Conformity in Uniform, which shows most of the main characters stuck in dead-end jobs and being discontent with life, their costumes showing their headspaces and inability to move forward in their careers, their aspirations, and their lives. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore uses the guise of a housewife turned singer turned waitress to show Alice's boxed identity between phases of her life until finally finding her true calling and wearing comfortable country clothes after settling down. Taxi Driver rather famously uses a Vietnam War military jumpsuit as Travis's work uniform, showing that even though he isn't serving overseas anymore, the struggle to survive and fighting for the will to keep going every day is a battle. The best example of this, and a rather unconventional choice for this category, would have to be the 1980 film Raging Bull, one of Scorsese's most famous works. The costume design is anything but subtle, with an obvious side of Jake LaMotta's life being in the ring, while his inner desires to bludgeon and fight carry outside the ring into his personal life. His boisterous self is only contained by the clutches of a blazer jacket. Jake is restricted from being his authentic yet terrifying self through a suit and tie by the end of the film, a uniform he must wear in order to live like everybody else. The final and definitely flashiest category on the list will be the period pieces, not only technically but critically, with all 3 of the key selections garnering an Oscar nomination or win for Best Costume Design in their respective years. The period piece doesn't use costumes in any trademarked way, instead adapting the time period itself based on the film's stories or themes. The Age of Innocence uses elegant dresses from 1870s New York to show the innermost desires of the main character in his pursuit of a true romance. A dull white dress showing his safe and obligated lover, while a gorgeous red dress shows where his heart truly belongs. The Aviator shows the highs and lows of Howard Hughes' career and his mental state, using costumes trending before 1927 to 1947 to show his time in the spotlight, and less clothing or even nudity to show his struggle with OCD. The pinnacle of Scorsese's period piece costumes can be seen in one of his most underappreciated works, 1997's Kundun, The Dalai Lama himself helped create instructions for the costumes seen in the stages of his life depicted within the movie. The more elegant and notably red pieces of clothing show the fortune and sacred nature of the Dalai Lama, with the theme of red changing meaning from safety to death as the film goes on. But of the three categories, suits and ties, conformity and uniform, and period piece, where would a film like Killers of the Flower Moon fit? I would argue it checks all three. In the aforementioned article I read, the film's costume design was taken largely from photographs and physical articles of clothing worn by the Osage people, and Osage artisans were hired for the production of the film to recreate these pieces. But for the rest of the non-Osage characters, the conditions for suits and ties and conformity in uniforms still work. King fits into his role as the most evil character in the film, hiding his deeds behind his suit while interacting with literally any character, his suit showing his unsaid dominance over the community. Ernest shows conformity in uniform through his soft compliance throughout the film, going about his life while aiding or letting terrible deeds pass on by for years, not being able to comprehend whether or not it's right to do so. Killers of the Flower Moon captures everything special about Scorsese's costume varieties and shows, in my opinion, the peak of this director's lyrical costume choices. Thank you for watching my multimodal remix project. I hope you learned something new.